Welcome to ChatNFL, the self-proclaimed only NFL talk show backed by AI. I am your host, Bradley Hamilton, joined alongside by veteran football watcher Pete Shinn. With the guidance of artificial intelligence, we'll be breaking down the NFL in a way you've never experienced before, artificially. Today, we'll be focusing on the AFC North, who they lost and gained in the offseason, picked up in the draft, and in the end, we'll be predicting where they'll stand at the end of next year's division standings. So to start, we'll go to Pete, get his thoughts on last year for the AFC North, how everything shook out.
Well, in the AFC North, we expected the Ravens to run away with it. What happened? They had their wings clipped by injury, specifically to Lamar Jackson. Now his contract's all straightened out. Who knows where we'll go from there, but he has to stay healthy. The Cincinnati Bengals, in many ways, overachieved. Talk of a sophomore slump for the losers of the Super Bowl proved to be premature, as they ended up, frankly, making a deep playoff run that I think a lot of people were surprised by, or at least were somewhat surprised by.
I would say so.
Then you look at the Steelers.
The Steelers, absolutely.
That was a team that wasn't expected to have many wins and ended up winning more than they losing, preserving Coach Tomlin's record for no seasons of sub-500 football.
They were so close to losing it. I don't know what deal he made with Roger Goodell or perhaps another third-party figure to secure that above 500 record, but he's nothing if not consistent.
And certainly that. And then as for the Browns, if you take a look at what they achieved last year, in some ways they underachieved. They arguably didn't really use Jacoby Brissett to his full advantage. But then when we saw Deshaun Watson come back on the field, we saw the effects of a 700-day layoff.
We saw the rust.
Indeed, we
did.
The
rust of legal bearers that will come down on anyone who goes through that.
Well, and that's a whole different subject, but the bottom line is that we don't know if Deshaun Watson can overcome the mental aspects of what he and others have been through over the last year and a half. So that'll remain to be seen in terms of this year as well, which we should probably talk about this upcoming season.
Yeah, absolutely. We should start at the top with the Bengals, making it deep into the playoffs, as you had mentioned. They had lost a couple of their key figures this offseason, especially in the room of safeties. Their deep coverage guys, safety Von Bell and Jesse Bates III, are both gone. Von Bell picked up 53 solo tackles. He forced 2 fumbles, had 4 picks, 8 passes broken up. He was someone who's making explosive plays, turning the ball over. And with Jesse Bates, he had 71 total tackles, forced a fumble, had 4 picks, 8 pass breakups. So both of these guys are putting up very similar stats and are both putting up a lot of clear reasons for other teams to want to take interest and take them.
Well, that's a huge loss, obviously, both of those guys.
Absolutely.
But But on the other hand, they have arguably the best defensive coordinator in the NFL in Lou Anarumo, arguably. So if anybody can take rookies or perhaps some veterans and turn them into an effective unit, you would think it'd be that guy.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's well-equipped, it would be the coaches to refine those players and make them into work for their team and their team layout. But in terms of people they've added to sort of address any past or current issues, they picked up Orlando Brown Jr. That's the big name, big offensive tackle, 4-year deal, $60 million plus dollars. I mean, you've got a franchise guy now on your left side to protect Joe Burrow.
Well, and you need that, as they've proven year after year. Their offensive line struggles, perennial, is what they've become. So they needed a stud at left tackle, and they got one.
It was a huge takeaway in their entire playoff run towards the Super Bowl, which they lost due to many sacks given up by the offensive line. So we saw that huge pickup. And one that I took interest in was safety Nick Scott. We saw the holes at safety now currently addressed. And this Nick Scott guy, he comes from the Rams. He had 56 solo tackles, but 86 total. He had 2 forced fumbles. He had 2 picks, and he broke up 5 passes. He's a little underrated. I don't know many people talking about this guy. But I think he helps address some of the issues in that deep coverage sphere that we're now currently facing. So I think he'll be an interesting pickup, and I think he should do a good enough job to try to pick up against the very good receivers that are in the AFC North. You got George Pickens with the Steelers, Amari Cooper now with the Browns.
And let's not forget about Odell Beckham Jr., of course, now with the Ravens.
Oh, we'll have plenty of time to get into him. But while we're talking about Ravens, we also have Mark Andrews to briefly get into. So safeties are known to move up and down the field, and we'll see where he ends up staying with the Bengals. Now, apart from those additions, there wasn't really much else. So we have to move sort of straight into the draft here. And the standout to me for their draft was just all defense. First round, they get a defensive pass rusher with Myles Murphy. Second round, they pick up a speedy cornerback with DJ Turner. I think he had a 4.26 40 time, something unbelievable. And then in the third round, they pick up a safety, Jordan Battle, out of Alabama. So their first 3 picks are all defense, and I'll get into some stats here that kind of jump out at me. Myles Murphy, round 1, comes out. He had 6.5 sacks last year, 2 passes defended, so he's able to bat the ball down, forces a fumble, 11 tackles for loss, makes his presence known in the run game. He sort of brings a dual threat on the defensive line that I would say is needed, apart from just Sam Hubbard for the Bengals. And with this DJ Turner guy, apart from his speed, what stands out to me is his 11 passes defended. This dude loves breaking up plays. He's got a pretty solid number of tackles with 36. Just 1 pick, but he did fumble return touchdown. That speed sort of showing off. So I think maybe if he doesn't work out immediately on their defensive field, we can see if he could do something in the return game. Maybe if they work on his hands a bit. And the Jordan Battle, this safety, he had sort of a slower year this year. Just 2 passes defended, a pick, 70 tackles. But the year before was a breakout year. 85 tackles, 3 interceptions, 2 of them to the house. Stands out to me a lot. And then 3 passes defended.
Well, and these are all people they've drafted, correct?
Indeed, absolutely. This year. These are current rookies who have not had NFL experience.
Well, and there lies the rub for Cincinnati, is that you're going to have a very inexperienced defensive backfield. And, of course, I've already praised Lou Amarola, the defensive coordinator.
Absolutely.
However, you've got to take into consideration that not all of these draft picks may work out.
Absolutely.
To say nothing of the fact that first they've got to get through rookie minicamp,
OTAs,
uninjured, and so forth.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the Bengals' defense this year, for sure.
I would say the good news is that during this offseason, they can gain some of the certainty, seeing how they interact with the team and other players, and I think they can sort of come up with a plan to address certain issues. So I don't think they'll be going into the season completely blind. They'll have some idea of what the rookies are capable of, but when it's game plan against game plan, that's when it's really going to matter. The first 4 weeks of the regular season, some say, is like another version of the preseason.
In fact, I say that.
Oh, and quoted as such. And because of that, and to your point, I think those will be very interesting weeks to watch for this Bengals secondary.
For sure. Absolutely. And we'll see how they come together, or if they come together.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was my main issue with the Bengals going into this upcoming year, as well as those issues at secondary. And I'm glad they addressed some of it, but I think there's still some holes there that we'll just have to see if they get filled later into the year.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And also, they lost Samaje Perine, running back 2, and that means that it's a bigger carry load for Joe Mixon, who had a monster, I believe, 5 rushing touchdowns last year. So it's not to say that he can't do it, but it's going to be a lot of pressure on him for a long season, and if he can't stay healthy, where does their run game go? Is Burrow able to just pass an offense the way that Mahomes can? Is that sort of the difference between quarterbacks there?
Well, I would say this about that, which is this.
Absolutely.
That Patrick Mahomes has a running game. Andy Reid has always produced a running game for Pat Mahomes.
That's fair.
One way or another.
And
now, a lot of times they're using a dual threat back like Pacheco,
yes,
who has good hands and can receive out of the backfield as well.
Absolutely.
So I would say that to say that Mahomes can pass his way to a Super Bowl without a running game, I would take issue with that
is a
assertion.
disservice. I guess I've definitely phrased that wrong. I guess not as strong of a running game.
Well, we shall see, but
Indeed.
There's really not a quarterback in the NFL that can take a team all the way to the Super Bowl without a running game.
That's true. Our standards are getting higher and higher for NFL players. I is my perspective.
On one hand, yes. On the other hand, when you talk about running backs, who's going to be the number 2 running back to Joe Mixon now that Samaje Perine is with the Broncos.
I don't remember them drafting a running back.
No need. Yeah. Running backs are plentiful. They can get a running back for cheap. That's probably pretty good.
The market is easy right now.
The market has for running backs is it's an affordable position that they can plug in one way or another. If they didn't draft a guy, they can certainly pick up a free agent that can run really fast and really hard. And that's one of the reasons why the running back position has been devalued. Now, what's hard to find is a guy like Samaje Perine, or even, of course, the all-time great right now at the running back receiving position, which is the guy with the LA Chargers, who is Austin Eckler.
Who's Austin Eckler?
Yes, my fantasy stud from last year.
One of your absolute favorites. You were raving about this man.
And, of course, he's the best in the business right now at catching passes out of the backfield as a running back.
Absolutely.
With apologies to some others who might
McCaffrey,
Debo Samuels. Sure, there's some others.
At one point, Kamara.
Of course. Yeah. But right now, he's the top of the game. Point is, if you have a running back that's a weapon, then you have a much more valuable player. But if you're just looking for a number 2 guy who can pound in there and get some tough yards, be a third down running back, I mean, you can pick up running backs, and I don't think that that's a real weakness for Cincinnati.
So their issues, as it stands, is some holes in the secondary and no RB2, which to you is a very easy fix.
Agreed.
Which leads us to their upside, which to me is stellar, lights-out offense that you upgraded with getting a better offensive line. I see nothing but upside for that, and I think that the small holes in the defense can get a nice first-class ticket onto Joe Burrow's back as they get themselves into the playoffs.
Well, we shall certainly see. The thing that could really be a problem for the Bengals is if they have any kind of key injury on offense, be that to Burrow, be that to Justin Jefferson, or even
Jamar Chase.
Sorry, Jamar Chase. With apologies to the Vikings. But yes, one of those injuries to one of those key players could be certainly problematic because they're going to be depending, I think, on their offense to carry the load.
And they did lose Hayden Hurst, who had some good receiving numbers, so I guess their tight end room is a little up in the air. But the tight end market is also very easy to fill out. If you need a good guy to block for Joe, that's probably what they'll do is get a good blocking tight end, make it a little easier for Joe Mixon.
Perhaps, but again, yeah, you can get a tight end who can block. You can get a tight end who can catch.
Absolutely.
But getting one who can do both.
That's the biggie.
That is a biggie, and it's hard to do,
It's
obviously.
hard to do. Yeah, the AFC North does have a lot of good tight ends, I'd wager. And the Bengals are not one of those teams.
That's right. There are a lot of good tight ends in the AFC North, and you're right. The Bengals right now, their tight end room has thinned out a little bit.
But overall, a good team last year, likely to be a good team this upcoming year.
No question about it. And would you like me to tell you what artificial intelligence thinks?
I think that's probably a really good idea.
AI thinks there's about a 75% chance that they're going to finish second in the division.
75% chance for second. Do you have a number on first?
Well, it would be less than 75%. I can tell you that.
That much is a given. 75% chance for second. That seems... I understand it.
Well, AI has a 75-degree confidence in that prediction. Let's put it that way.
All right.
So
doubling down on 75.
I am doubling down on 75%. So what would it take to get them to first place? Well, perhaps we should talk about last year's second-place team, the Ravens, to get a sense for what might happen.
Good idea. Baltimore Ravens, they go 10-7 last year. They lose in the wild card to the Bengals. So I would say that while it's a successful season and that you get to the playoffs, you don't get with it past the first round, which is kind of a stinker. But to go into this offseason, they lost a couple players that stand out to me. They lose Calais Campbell, a veteran, a leader on the defensive line. I have a special place in my heart for him. Some Cardinals fans might as well back in a decade ago.
Sure.
Had 5.5 sacks last year, prominent pass rushing threat. They traded their safety Chuck Clark to the Jets for a 7th-round pick. He had 4 passes defended, over 100 tackles last year. They lost their starting guard, Ben Powers. He started all of 2022, as I believe. They lose 2 cornerbacks in Kyle Fuller and Marcus Peters as well. So that's a lot of defense that they've lost. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm going to tell you my thoughts on that, which is that Baltimore's defense last year wasn't very good when it counted.
Not clutch.
And And especially in some of those close games they lost, you could pin that on the age of the defense.
Yes, absolutely. Kyle Hamilton, rookie, safety last year, but just a rookie.
And in both directions.
Yeah.
Because so you had a rookie last year, but you also have Calais Campbell, who's roughly speaking, and I'm going to do an estimate here, he's about 1,000 years old. And so to say that he's lost a step is being charitable. Now, 5.5 sacks are not rookie numbers. It's a good total.
Absolutely.
But it's a far cry from his peak performance.
Absolutely.
And you can't argue at this point that he's a real difference maker the way that he used to be, other than as a player type coach.
In the locker room, a game changer. On the field, still there, but just not as dominant as he once was. Absolutely.
And so that's Calais Campbell. Marcus Peters, there were times when I watched the Baltimore Ravens last year where he just wasn't a very good safety.
Not at times, no.
So I think that they have I would view this for Baltimore certainly as less of a we've got to make changes because we can't afford these guys,
right,
to we got to make changes because these guys weren't that good.
Yeah, they're sort of going through the drawers here and throwing out what doesn't quite fit in. I kind of get they're sort of gutting out certain parts of the defense and trying to fit in other players, try to work out the depth.
Of course they are, but at the same time, you got to wonder whether or not they're going to be able to restock the fridge here and make it work. Because last year, even though they got to the playoffs, they certainly didn't get to the playoffs on the strength of their defense alone, for sure.
Certainly not. But to get into their additions, they lost a lot on defense, but their additions were mostly focused on offense. They pick up wide receiver Odell Beckham, as you had mentioned, also picking up Nelson Aguilar as well. Some numbers about them. Odell did have 5 touchdowns last year. Not a huge number, picking up just over 500 yards. And Nelson Aguilar having just 2 touchdowns, just over 350 yards, and he had 2 fumbles. It's just a note I'd like to make. So while they did address wide receiver there, not quite. And to address the secondary, they pick up Rock Yassin. He's sort of a veteran defensive back. He played with the Colts for a while, was with the Raiders last year, I believe. He had 7 passes defended last year. Pretty good at breaking up the pass. Sort of helps replace some of the names they had last year.
Well, I'd like to talk for just a second about these offensive additions. To me, I'll be honest, both of these guys they're big risks.
They are.
They're both substantial risks.
Yeah.
And so to make them pay off, they're going to need a coach that can really get the most out of this situation. And they've got an offensive coordinator in Todd Monken who probably can.
I would say so.
And that's why you got to have confidence that the Ravens are going to be explosive offensively. And I think that that's going to be the case. I would be shocked if they don't average 30 points a game. I'd be surprised at that.
Averaging 30 points?
I believe that they will, because I believe that Todd Monken's offense can get 30 points a game out of this collection of talent.
And are you expecting those to be shootout games as well? Are you expecting more like 30-15s, 30-24s?
I think it's going to be a lot of close games that the offense is going to have to win. I don't think that Baltimore's defense is going to be anything like their vaunted awesome defense of 2000, 2001.
Yeah,
those led by Ray Lewis. Don't expect that out of this year's Baltimore Ravens defense.
The dreaded linebacker room. Yeah, certainly not. Although there is a draft that stands out to me in their linebacker room. We'll talk about him in just a minute here. But, yeah, I agree with their choices in Odell Beckham Jr. and Nelson Aguilar.
Do you? Because Odell Beckham Jr. is coming off an ACL. Is he not? Or an Achilles? I can't remember now. He's terribly injured. He's been on a long rehab.
We'll find out his injuries. I think in terms of... it got Lamar Jackson to sign the contract, is the point I will raise. And that means that he has some confidence in the team.
You think that because they signed Odell Beckham Jr., that's why they got that contract done with Lamar?
No, I think there's other factors we'll talk about that helped get the done deal. There were other wide receivers on the market that were better. That's true. thinking about it now, thinking about the other wide receivers I've been writing down about who goes where.
Right? That's like these guys.
Sometimes you just got to sit on it.
Not that good. And here's my point.
Kind of like a bad taste in my mouth.
One of the things that will likely make this offense run is its two tight ends, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely.
Absolutely.
And
that's very likely.
So they're going to have the ability to clear out some linebackers and to get some easy passes and get that offense going. The question is, will they have a deep threat? Can we count on Nelson Aguilar and a guy like Odell Beckham Jr. to pose a legitimate deep threat for Lamar Jackson?
I hear what you're saying, and I think the long answer is no, I don't think they can provide that deep threat. The short answer is, I do remember last year, Ravens, Jags, it's in the fourth quarter. Lamar Jackson's within his own 20, corks 50, 60-yard pass to Deshaun Jackson, who had stripped by two defenders at like 35 years old to get them, I think, able to score and just prolong the game. So I think the opportunities will come for Odell Beckham and Nelson Aguilar, much like it did for Deshaun Jackson.
That's a fair point, and I would just follow up on that by saying that Lamar Jackson's got a heck of an arm.
He is a very good quarterback, and I think a good quarterback is something that will make these two wide receivers look a bit better.
Well, especially in Todd Monken's offense.
Yeah, I'm very excited to see the offensive package. I'm interested. I'm going to be excited when Lamar Jackson is just lined up in the I formation because it's just, it's something from the contrary.
You mean under center?
Under center, yes.
Exactly.
I was thinking in the I formation.
Well, yeah, he's in the I, could be in the I formation, but just to see him under center versus exclusively in the pistol, it will give him some options that currently he has not had under the prior OC's Greg Roman's offense.
Yes, indeed, the Roman himself.
But here's a key question when it comes to Lamar Jackson. He got injured last year, got injured the year before as well. Yeah. So the question becomes, hey, what is their strength and conditioning program like? Well, they've got a new strength and conditioning coach, and it's a guy that they promoted from within. So you might wonder...
Pros and cons.
Precisely.
Because he's been with them for 4 years,
that's
I believe
right.
it was. So he's integrated in the system. It's probably an easy adjustment.
You would think that.
As he was an assistant.
But the question is, if he's going to do all of the same things that the Ravens have always done, is it enough to keep that team healthy? And I think there's probably not enough attention paid by gamblers, serious people who are doing this for money,
absolutely,
on the strength and conditioning coaching staffs of various teams and their regiments, because that ultimately is going to determine one key point in a season, which is the rate of injury.
Yeah.
So my advice would be to focus in on that strength and conditioning coach.
It's a huge, huge value. I mean, when the Titans were on their 7-game losing streak, I believe they had the most number of players, active players, on their injured reserve. It was an insane number of injuries, and they had suffered because of it.
And of course, you can't point the finger solely at the strength and conditioning staff.
No, but
however, you got to question a team with a lot of injuries. Hey, how were they conditioned? How were they trained? And who's responsible?
And the
for
fact that they replaced him is a testament to the fact that they are paying attention to that fact and willing to address it.
A very fair point.
Yeah, it happened late February, I believe. But I'm interested to get into some of these draft picks because there's 3 that stand out to me, and I'm very excited about. Round 1, wide receiver pool. It was a big pool. They grabbed Zay Flowers out of Boston College. He had 78 receptions last year, 1,077 yards, just crested the 1,000-yard barrier, 12 touchdowns. This guy scores a lot of points. So I think, depending on how he develops and how the other younger receivers on that roster develop, I think he could do a really good job to score some of those deeper threat touchdowns you were talking about. Always help clear up some of those guys who can get those deeper threat touchdowns.
That's making me feel better already, this guy.
I mean, they knew what their needs were going into the draft, and they answered the need pretty easily. I mean, that makes every Raven fan happy, because if they didn't do that, it'd be a nightmare. It'd be riots in the streets.
Sure. In Baltimore, for sure.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
And in the round 3, this one I really like. Pick up linebacker from Clemson, Trenton Simpson. He had 77 tackles, 4 forced fumbles, 2.5 sacks. Oh, I misread, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 3 passes defended, and 2 forced fumbles. What I like about him is that he's versatile, which is something that is not always happened in the linebacker room for the Ravens. We were mentioning Ray Lewis and Terrell Suggs. Those are big guys who are just going to knock you over, bowl you over, try to rip the ball from your hands. And
Dominant players.
Dominant players. Trenton Simpson will be a dominant player in my prediction, but not for those same reasons. I think this is a guy who is going to be incredible in the passing game. I think you can get him in the flats very easily, and he's going to move around, and he's going to adjust to it well. I think he's going to make his presence felt in multiple stages of the game. I think he's going to be able to bring a little bit of pressure to a quarterback every now and again. Mm-hmm. He'll be able to blow up in the run game if need be on a blitz. But I like his passing numbers as well, his coverage numbers. So I think he's a well-rounded linebacker that's going to help out that front seven.
Well, Bradley, of course, it's common for the Baltimore Ravens to get a good, quote-unquote, draft grade. And it sounds like they deserve it in this case as well. And hearing the draft picks that they made, having you refresh your memory on that, it makes me feel a lot better about Baltimore's chances. Would you like to hear how AI thinks about them?
What does AI believe the chances for the Baltimore Ravens winning the AFC North?
Well, they believe those chances to be they predict Baltimore Ravens. Artificial intelligence predicts that with 75% degree of confidence, that the Baltimore Ravens will win the AFC North, and in a convincing fashion.
In a convincing fashion?
Well, by at least one game.
Oh, okay. By not a half game.
But they shouldn't have to play their way in. They should be, in other words, by week 18 of the NFL season, they should, so by week 16 of the NFL season, they should not have to, I think their schedule calls for playing Cincinnati one of the last games. That should not be the decisive game that gets them into the playoffs.
Not at all.
Bottom line is that AI believes that Baltimore's offense, with Lamar Jackson, the new receivers, and a bolstered line, is going to be, and particularly Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator on offense, AI believes that Baltimore's offense is going to far outstrip any other teams in the AFC North, and that they will win probably 12 to 13 games.
12 to 13? I like those numbers. I have some faults with the Ravens that doesn't quite take into account. But I also wanted to briefly mention this one fourth-round pick, just because of his numbers here, Tavius Robinson, defensive lineman. I think he's your Calais Campbell replacement. He had 4 forced fumbles last year and 6 sacks with 7 tackles for loss. And those numbers alone stand out to me as a replacement on the defense and fixing the pass rush issue.
Sure.
And I also want to say that when I was going through the losses for the Ravens, I noticed they lost quite a few offensive linemen that weren't starting. Their depth behind the offensive line is sort of not quite there. And I figure that they would maybe address the offensive line more so rather than losing some of their players. I think the offensive line is just 1 or 2 injuries away from getting Lamar Jackson in a lot of trouble, which could lead to a lot of trouble down the line.
Who can say for sure? But
for sure, that's depending upon injuries. But I think it's a thin line protecting Lamar.
Well, here's the thing that I would point out about all of that, which is that all of these rookies on any teams that we're talking about
are dark.
We're not going to know how they're really going to perform, most of them, for a couple of years. Now, there's going to be some superstar standouts that you're going to recognize as immediately. These guys are stars.
Offense, defensive rookie of the years.
Precisely.
They have awards for them.
Sure. But bulk of these guys that have been drafted or have been picked up in free agency, the bulk of them are going to take a while to work out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or not.
Absolutely.
And so it's too soon to tell whether or not the Ravens are going to have the kind of success that they're going to actually need to get out of their draft class.
Absolutely.
And so that's the X factor for the Ravens. If they're able to plug in these rookies and veterans that they've got, new coaching, and make it work, well then, the Ravens, according to artificial intelligence, should win the AFC North pretty handily. So that's where they're at. And then the rest of the AFC North, you say, well, what chance do Pittsburgh and the Browns have? Well, I would say that Pittsburgh might have a better chance than you think.
Well, would you like to get into them now so we can get down to the bottom of this?
Absolutely.
All right, well, we'll start now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They went 9-8 by some miracle of not Tom Coughlin.
How about Mike Tomlin?
Mike Tomlin. Thank you.
That's okay. I called Justin Jefferson.
Jamar Chase.
I did.
Or vice versa.
Precisely.
They unfortunately missed the playoffs last year.
Unfortunately, if you're a Steelers fan.
Unfortunately, if you're a Steelers fan. Led a strong effort with Kenny Pickett, a surprisingly strong effort for the rookie. However, for this offseason, they did lose a couple positions. I will say, not players, but positions. They lost 3 linebackers that stand out to me: Devin Bush, Miles Jack, and Robert Spillane. All 3 had very good numbers, including a lot of passes defended. They lost their cornerback Cam Sutton to the Lions. He had 3 picks and 13 passes broken up last year. Very good numbers. They lost 2 tackles, Trent Scott and Jesse Davis. So I would say immediately off the cusp, the players they lost, their linebacker room is gutted. Offensive line is now a little bit weaker, and Cam Sutton is a very good player on the corner that they've lost.
Well, it's true. They've lost some defensive players. But in Tomlin, you've got to trust. That's the mantra.
You got to trust the process.
We've got to trust Mike Tomlin because he has never had a losing season.
It's a testament.
It speaks to his ability to take a team and guide them to victory in difficult situations. And it shows the power of coaching, for sure. The question is, can they replace that talent? That team's strength was arguably its defense, particularly with T.J. Watt on the field.
Absolutely. Well, the good news is they addressed the linebacker room in their offseason additions. They picked up 2. Cole Holcomb, who had some sort of okay numbers, nothing that jumps out compared to their previous linebacker numbers. But they did pick up Ellendon Roberts. He had 4.5 sacks last year, over 100 tackles, 9 tackles for a loss. This guy looks like he can bring a lot of pressure in the run game and also very much so in the pass game. So their linebacker room sort of got picked up a little bit. Some of the pieces got put in. And they also picked up an offensive tackle, Raven Clark, who had a couple starts last year. So I think out of those linebackers they picked up, it helps, but I still don't like where their front 7 as a whole is at right now.
From a defensive standpoint or offensive
Their
standpoint?
defensive front 7, yeah. Their defensive line, while they have T.J. Watt, who's a stud, I don't love how their linebacker room looks.
I see. Well, to that I will say Tomlin's strength as a coach, even though he was a tight ends coach, has been hiring quality defensive staff. And having Brian Flores.
That's right. Brian Flores to the Steelers.
Did he go to the Vikings or to the Steelers? Now we need to check.
The Vikings sounds more correct.
I think that's right.
Now that you've said Vikings, I kind of remember that. But they could have.
Yeah,
defensive coordinator for the Vikings, yes.
Well, what a great pickup for the Vikings.
Honestly.
But one of the reasons I linked those 2 men is because, obviously, Coach Tomlin's been very supportive of Brian Flores in his lawsuit against the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah.
Rightly so, in my opinion.
It's
one of the most atrocious firings in NFL history was getting rid of that guy after a winning season.
Legally bubkiss.
With a bad team. Unbelievable.
Nightmare.
We'll see him as a head coach again, I guarantee.
I hope so.
But not for the Steelers, probably, unless something really disastrous happens to Mike Tomlin.
No prayers on anyone's downfall.
Certainly
here.
not.
We're not implying anything.
Oh, certainly not.
So not a ton of pickups from them, but in the draft, I was pretty happy with what they did. They drafted who I think is a very good offensive tackle in the first round, Broderick Jones. In 13 games, he allowed just 8 hurries and 1 QB hit. No sacks allowed in that season for him. I think protecting Pickett is very important. So now they have a young offensive tackle, a second-year quarterback, and a second-year wide receiver who made arguably one of the catches of the year last year. So you have those 3 kind of key positions on an offense, seemingly, possibly addressed. If all 3 of these guys hit, the Steelers' offense is going to be pretty solid again. They can at least have a backbone to build off of on offense.
The real problem with the Steelers' offense last year was that they had a real hard time in many games getting Najee Harris going.
Absolutely.
And so when you say, gee, their offensive line looks weaker, that's a big concern because they've got to get that running game going to help Kenny Pickett. Mm-hmm. And so, yes.
I would say to that, I was going to add on that they did select in the 3rd round Darnell Washington. He was a tight end a lot of people had in their first round for their mock drafts, and he fell and he fell and he fell. I thought the Jags were going to pick him up at one point before they went with their Penn State tight end. But this guy, his blocking is phenomenal. You get this guy to be a very good blocker for the runner to start off with. I think as the years develop, you can figure him out in the passing game because he has those traits and qualities and abilities. But to start with, this dude can open up a lane. And with them drafting Darnell Washington and having Pat Freiermuth on the other side, I think that should give Najee the opportunity to succeed. Whether or not he takes it is going to be up to him personally as a player. I think he has a better chance this year to do better and to have that rushing game be addressed.
All of that may be true. And I guess my primary concern with the Pittsburgh Steelers is simply that they don't yet have the demonstrated explosive offense that the Ravens and the Bengals obviously do, or have had in the recent past. Even when Ben Roethlisberger was at the controls, one never really described the Pittsburgh offense. No one generally described the Pittsburgh offense as explosive. It was more methodical.
They held that for the defense with Polamalu and Harrison.
Certainly.
That explosiveness.
So, really the question for the Steelers is, can their second-year quarterback keep up with the established quarterback superstars in the league? I think the answer is going to be no.
I mean, the division, AFC North quarterbacks, it's pretty solid. You got Burrow and Jackson just off the cusp.
And, by the way, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but
certainly
after Pickens, the fourth quarterback, Deshaun Watson was at one time a superstar MVP candidate as well.
He was very good. There were some great highlights of him as a Texan.
So a lot of quarterbacks in this league is a point in this particular division of the AFC.
Absolutely. And just another person who stood out to me in the draft this year for them is because they lost Cam Sutton, they were looking for a cornerback, and they pick up Joey Porter Jr. at the top of the second round. Now, I know that cornerbacks taken in the top of the second round go pretty well. I'm a Jags fan. Tyson Campbell is fantastic for us. Joey Porter Jr. had some very good numbers.
And not only that, but he's Joey Porter Sr.'s son, a Steelers legend.
It's a culture fit inside a culture fit inside a culture fit. It was, the bloodline bleeds Steelers.
It's so funny because obviously the NFL is such a small organization. It's so interesting to see so many fathers and sons go into coaching and into playing.
Coaching for one, playing. Yeah, Bill McCaffrey, you loved watching him play as you grew up, or as you were growing up. And I like watching Christian McCaffrey as I was growing up.
Oh, sorry. No wonder I didn't understand who the heck you were talking about.
Isn't that Bill McCaffrey?
Certainly not.
What's his name?
You're talking about Ed McCaffrey.
I was thinking of Bill Romanowski.
You were thinking about Bill Romanowski. If Bill Romanowski and Ed McCaffrey had a baby, they would have named it Bill McCaffrey. That would have been nice.
And that would have been a heck of a football player.
It sure would have been.
But Joey Porter Jr.
That'd
be a really good football player.
Look, I think it's important to tell the audience right now, Joey Porter Jr. is not the illegitimate offspring of Bill Romanowski and Joey Porter Sr. Thank you.
Allegedly. But he did have good numbers. In just 10 games, he had 11 pass breakups and a fumble recovery. Averaging a pass breakup or 0.1 per game, I'd say it's pretty good numbers. And I think it is exactly the type of numbers that you'd expect from a 13 passes defended last year from Cam Sutton.
Absolutely. Now, there's a guy in Joey Porter Jr. As a rookie, you'd be very surprised if he wasn't an immediate impact player.
I see both Broderick Jones and Joey Porter Jr. as day one starters. That's why they stand out to me, is because for Joey Porter Jr. it's positional, and Broderick Jones, I think, at offensive tackle, I think he can just be a plug-and-play starter.
Well, I'm going to tell you what artificial intelligence thinks of all of this.
Honestly, dying to hear it.
Artificial intelligence thinks this.
Claims to believe
that they have there's a 75% degree of confidence.
Okay.
That Pittsburgh is going to finish just where they did last year, in third place, with almost the identical win total.
Is that right?
That's a fact. And so, I say it's a fact. It's a fact that AI said that, yes. We put in a lot of data, and that's what it spit out, with a 75% degree of confidence. 75% degree of confidence.
That's a pretty solid percentage.
It's a pretty solid percentage. But here's the thing that makes you less confident on the upside for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay.
One, great coaching.
Yes.
That's number one.
Right.
Number two, though, is the fact that, in fact, this offense has the potential to be very, very good. And so it has the potential, if it is in fact fully realized, then all of a sudden you've got Pittsburgh possibly challenging both Baltimore and Cincinnati. You've got a real dogfight then in the AFC North if Pittsburgh's offense can get going. Because I, unlike you, think there's not going to be a problem with Pittsburgh's front seven, because they're going to have a lot of support from some real studs in the backfield.
That's true. I guess when I say front seven, that was speaking a little heavily. I question their linebacker room. I'm not going to diss the Steelers' defensive line. They were, top 10 in sacks?
They're a great
certainly
defense.
were in 2021 with TJ.
You can never count out Pittsburgh's defense.
You can never count out Pittsburgh's defense.
So that being said, the confidence level in a third place finish for Pittsburgh, for me, is actually quite high when you consider the competition.
Honestly, yeah. It really is a fight for third once you incorporate the Ravens and Bengals into any sort of competition.
Precisely, but you can never count out Pittsburgh either. They've got a great coach. They've got young players who have shown a lot of growth over the last year, and obviously the ability to integrate new guys into a cohesive team, which is the one thing we're saying, hey, can the Ravens especially integrated a lot of new guys into an existing team? Mike Tomlin's proven time and again he's capable of doing that. So you got to give Pittsburgh the edge in terms of coaching and in terms of not much else, really, frankly.
I would say, it's hard to say that they're not the best coached team in the AFC, maybe bar Patriots, only because of Belichick's legacy, but they are up there in terms of just best well-rounded coaching staff, although I've heard some complaints come out of it before. Not really worth looking into as I'm not playing for them anytime soon.
Right, well...
Sounds like their business and not mine.
Of course. But somebody has to come in last place, too.
Someone has to, and we're not saying it because they're going to this year, but because they did last year. That brings us lastly to the Browns. Finishing at 7-10, they, of course, missed the playoffs, led at the end by Deshaun Watson, who looked a bit rusty, had, I think, one good game to round out the season before going into this offseason, which starts with some losses. They lose Jadeveon Clowney.
An arguable loss.
An arguable loss. And Chase Winovich, which also based off of his numbers is an arguable loss. So that's two edge rushers out of the books to start off with, which I don't believe is a huge issue, which we will go into why a bit later. They also lost Jacoby Brissett, their resounding quarterback who picked up 2,500 yards last year, 12 picks, 12 touchdowns, and 6 picks, and a 64% completion percentage.
Yeah.
Journeyman status, he's going to hit the carousel again. We're not sure where he's going to land.
So here's the thing, right? So Alex Van Pelt, he's the coach of the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns.
Yes.
He took Jacoby Brissett last year, and he looked pretty good.
He didn't look. With Amari Cooper to throw to, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, not bad. I was not impressed.
Here's the bottom line: if you say, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers are clearly the best coached team in the AFC North,
right? Yeah.
With apologies to Jim Harbaugh and Zach Taylor,
absolutely.
If you agree, though, that that's the case, I don't think there's any real argument that the Browns have the worst head coach in Kevin Stefanski. And the best example I can give you to that is Week 4 last year when they blow a 13-point lead with 1 minute and 42 seconds left to the New York freaking Jets.
To the Flacco,
the New York freaking Jets, but the Flacco-led New York freaking Jets.
Yeah.
How do you do that? The answer, bad coaching. You got your kids, you're distracted. You got your kids down on the field. It's insane. So Kevin Stefanski may be growing as a human being and getting better, and I hope that's the case because we all need to improve as human beings, right?
Yeah, getting better as a human being is huge, but getting better as a coach is even huger.
That's true. Well, let's hope that happens for the Cleveland Browns.
It's going to need to.
At least one loss last year you can pin directly on the head coach. And more than that, if you get right into the deep breakdown.
But the fact that you can easily pin it on a coach, much like you did with the early days of Hackett before he could hack it, it's not a good look.
That's true. Referring to Nathaniel Hackett. Formerly of the Denver
Broncos. Former Denver Broncos coach.
And current Jet coach.
Jet coach.
On we go.
We will now get into some of their additions, however, sort of adding on to their roster. They pick up 2 wide receivers who I'm not super opposed against. They pick up Jets receiver Elijah Moore.
Great.
37 receptions, 446 yards, and just 1 touchdown in 13 games. A little overshadowed by Garrett Wilson and just a couple injuries. But they also pick up Marquise Goodwin. He's a veteran, a bit older, but I mean, in just 27 receptions, he had 4 touchdowns last year. So that's a pretty solid touchdown to catch ratio that I think will be important for a team that needs to score points. Their offense did not always put up the highest numbers.
Oh, certainly not.
So getting someone like that. And the big news, the more recent news to come out of Cleveland was there was questions about their pass rush. I mean, sure, they have Myles Garrett, but who's going to be alongside him? They lose Clowney. Then comes Darius Smith. Granted, he's a linebacker, so he's not always going to be down there. But if you look at his numbers, you know where he's going to be on most plays. 10 sacks and 10 sacks. Double-digit sack season. I know a lot of defensive linemen who do not have double-digit sacks or more.
And where's Smith coming from?
Darius Smith is coming from the Vikings. So they pick up a very good pass-rushing linebacker from Minnesota, and I think it will create a very scary defense in Myles Garrett and Za'Darius.
Well, particularly when you pair it with that 1 draft pick that they took on defense.
Oh, are you referring to perhaps defensive tackle Saika Ika?
Yeah, that guy.
Saika Ika. He had a pretty solid year this year, but his year last year was even better, similar to Jordan Battle over with Bengals. But this year, he had 2 passes defended, 2 tackles for loss, culminating at 24 tackles. But in the year before, also 24 tackles, but 6 tackles for loss and 3.5 sacks. So while having a bit of a slow year, it's clear what his potential could be and perhaps even further beyond. So they grab him in the 3rd round. But before that, they grab another wide receiver in the 3rd round with Cedric Tillman, who I think he will have maybe not an immediate impact, but within the next 2 years will certainly have an impact on this team. In 2021, he picked up 12 touchdowns and over 1,000 receiving yards. Only played 6 games last year, and even then picked up 3 touchdowns and over 400 yards receiving. So I think he's going to be someone Watson or whoever the future quarterback of the Browns may be. I think they'll be looking his way for a while.
Well, I bashed earlier Kevin Stefanski.
You did.
And that may be one of the reasons that they brought in Jim Schwartz, former NFL head coach, as defensive coordinator, perhaps to help coach the coach. Every coach needs some coaching. That's just the way human nature is. We all need to coach.
It's a support group
exactly.
of coaches.
Well, let's hope that is the case, because Jim Schwartz has a great background, great defensive background, and one would think that he's going to be able to take these disparate parts that they're adding into their defense and make that team work. Because last year, everything I heard suggested that their their locker room was not a functional place.
It was not right.
And so establishing a proper locker room culture is going to be really important if they're going to have success on the field. They're going to have success behind the scenes before they can have any success between the hash marks.
You can only succeed on the field when you succeed off the field.
It's so true. And the Browns have not had a great record of doing that. Now, they've had some success over the last few years.
Sure.
And
Can't be denied.
And if you have an adult in the room, you have to feel a little bit better that he's going to temper or perhaps improve some of Stefanski's worst instincts and make for a really good defense.
This defense stands out to me. This defensive line especially.
But for me, the key question offensively is Deshaun Watson who they think he is. Can he return to the level of play that he showed in 2017 and 2018? Mm-hmm. Can he be the superstar quarterback that he was before his downfall for egregious behavior?
Yeah.
So, I don't think that question was answered by last year's performance.
There wasn't enough time to have it fully answered. I think this offseason, preseason, first 4 weeks into the regular season, I think we'll get maybe a better picture then, but even then, not a full picture. It's the dog days of the season. It's when you see who the great quarterbacks are shining amongst the journeyman or mediocre quarterbacks.
Well, we'll soon see that for sure. But I would add just this point, which is that when you think about the Cleveland Browns, you got to consider the fact that Deshaun Watson could also be really good this year.
That's also
and so
true.
There's a distinct possibility that the Browns could be a pretty significant surprise for the AFC North.
I think that is likely a possibility. The possibility of
well, it's undoubtedly a possibility.
I'm not super sold. I'm sold on the defensive line. I'm sold on Denzel Ward as a cornerback, but I'm not sold on their entire secondary. I'm sold on rub-a-dub-dub, let's give it to Nick Chubb. Fantastic running back. The best running back in that division.
Well, and we'd be remiss if not to point out that who does Nick Chubb remind you of most when you look at him and when you look at old film? Jim Brown.
Absolutely.
And Jim Brown, can't certainly condone anything that happened in regards to domestic violence, but as a running back, probably none better.
Yeah.
In many ways. Certainly his yards per average among the highest in NFL history.
I mean, to get an award for most rushing yards in a game named after you, you have to be a good rusher. And the way Nick Chubb runs, just that grinding run, it's very akin.
He's by far my favorite player on that team is Nick Chubb.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think he can help you with your offense. And if Watson works out, I think it complements well enough. And I think that offense could be pretty good, if not great. But if that happens, it's all kind of depends on Watson, and I'm not sold on him completely.
Of course you're not, and nor am I. Nor is really probably anyone outside the Browns building right now. However, you can't rule it out as a possibility. All of that being said, I will tell you that artificial intelligence has, with a 75% degree of confidence, determined that the Browns are going to finish right where they finished last year, in dead last in the conference. And so I think that that's also a prediction that I have about a 75% degree of confidence in.
Yeah, I would. A 75, that is a good number that it's decided to use. I wonder if that'll be consistent throughout the divisions.
It depends on how I prompt it.
That's also true. It also aligns, the order, that is, it also aligns with how I had predicted the AFC North standings.
Well, lay it on me, Brad.
Well, looking at the schedule, looking who they face, they'll be facing the AFC South teams, so I think it'll be interesting. The Browns games against the Texans will be fun, Watson against his old team, and the other team, I mean, the old division rivals. They'll be facing the Jags, the AFC South teams. So I think the Browns games will be fun to watch, even if they themselves won't be the fun ones to watch all the time.
All right, I think that might be true.
And
especially if you don't like Deshaun Watson.
Especially if you want to root against the team, AI says to choose the Browns for that reason.
Which is actually not true. But however, I think that's a fair thing to say. I think if we prompted it correctly, it would give that output.
I'm not going to legally implicate it on anything because I don't know if I can yet. I don't know if there's a law for that.
All right, so you're going to give us a record breakdown? What are you going to do?
I'm going to give you a record breakdown. So I have Ravens first, Bengals second, Steelers third, Browns last, much like AI. I see the Ravens going 12-5, sitting at the top, winning the division, uncontested to an extent. I don't think week 18 will be a huge week, I think they can sit some players. At number 2, I see the Bengals at 11-6. I think a full game behind. I think they go 1-1 in the division, but I think the Bengals, because some of the questions at safety, I think they'll give up a couple deep passes late when it matters, and the defense will not be as clutch. Some close losses. Steelers, I see a repeat. I see 9-8. I can't make myself picture 10 wins for the Steelers.
Well, then don't do it, Brad.
I can't do it. You can't make me. You can't force me. I know it sounds a little crazy.
Well, can I force you into believing into a winning record for the Browns?
No, I have them sitting at 7-9-1. I predict one tie this year, and I think it'll be the Browns to bring it to us. Who they tie with is going to be a spoiler for the rest of the season.
And it's anyone's guess.
Until we get to that division episode.
7-8-1, eh? No.
7-9-1.
Indeed.
7-9-1. So I think they do a half game better than they did this last year. But
Thanks, Jim Schwartz.
I see some stagnation in the bottom two and a switching of division champions.
Well, you agree with artificial intelligence, which has the records laying out this way. Baltimore Ravens, 13-4.
Okay.
Cincinnati Bengals, 11-6.
All right.
Pittsburgh Steelers, 9-8. And Cleveland Browns, 5-12.
5-12 for they expect regression. Honestly, for me, a successful season for the Browns is not regressing, based on my prediction here. So to give them 5 wins, I don't fully agree with. 13-4, I could see that for the Ravens.
So I get it. You're smarter than a computer. I get it.
Yeah. When a robot overlords come, I will be fighting against them. I will be joining the resistance. But it agreed with me on the Bengals and Steelers, so I might hesitate a bit before I pull the trigger.
It's entirely possible that AI is not a Deshaun Watson fan. That's entirely possible.
That's true. It might be. Yeah, there's some other statistics we might not know.
There's some biases we might not be fully tuned into.
Yeah, how many picks has he thrown? How many suits have been filed? I mean, how many touchdowns has he thrown?
About the same, as it turns out.
Yeah, it's kind of along the same lines.
So, in other words, I would just say that when you take a look at what the analytical mind looks at and what we look at, it's all pretty much the same thing. And here's what it's all going to boil down to. Don't bet on any of this. Because
betting on it's a nightmare.
It's a bad idea.
It's a nightmare.
Because at the end of the day, especially at this point in the season, you just don't have an idea what kind of injury bugs you're going to get, and you don't have a good idea at this point what these rookies are really going to look like.
We can talk about these rookies for hours if you want us to, and we can if you want us to.
Especially he.
I would love to. However, we don't know if they're going to work or not. I mean, I can make a video, an hour-long video talking about 50 rookies, and you could watch about 7 to 8 minutes of that video in the next 2 years and be like, oh, he was right. And then that's 42 minutes of wasted time. So you can bet on those 8 minutes, or you can just choose to not bet on sports, which is what I would do. Me personally would not do.
That's what he says until we get him his first complimentary offer from DraftKings. But in the meantime...
Can't wait. And what's the over-under on that happening?
90% of gamblers quit just 10% of the time. Wait a minute, that's not quite right.
I'm afraid you're not quite right. It's 90% of gamblers quit right before they hit big.
That's what it is
so
right there.
You're not that 10%. No one's that 10%.
You bet
unless you
right.
are.
Well, let's hope. Well, I hope you've enjoyed ChatNFL.
Absolutely. Thank you for tuning in. If you wish to see more, let us know on our socials, on Twitter and YouTube. And if you wish to subscribe and perhaps like, feel free to do so. And if you choose not to, also feel free to do so. Technically, it's easier for you to not do that. So if you do it, it shows you go out of your way for something that you care about. So thank you for that. Make sure to hug your loved ones. And goodbye.